The thing that I wanted to do is, even with my audio summits, I'm like, okay, how can we keep this really, really easy for the person who is being interviewed? I have one of my guest experts is, coming from India. Well, we were able to just do this completely asynchronous where it didn't have to be in real time.
Welcome, everybody, to another Launch Your Private Podcast case study episode. Today, we have Brenna McGowan. She is a launch strategist and copywriter, as well as the founder of a popular online event that many of you might have seen in the interwebs, Behind the Launch. I believe you've ran this event 4 times, or is it like 3?
I'm going into our 5th season in January.
I knew it. Cool. Okay, so we're 5 seasons deep. And she's kind of one of the first people that I ran into. I ran into you from Diane Mayer, a prior guest episode, where she voxed me and she's like, I don't know if you know Brenna, but she's doing an audio launch event and she's running MP3s on a page. And I told her about private podcast. So this was a couple of years ago. It was like Hello Audio had just come out. This like concept of private podcasting and summits and that kind of thing was very new. But Diane Mayer was like, definitely somebody who was just like, I'm going to tell her, just so you know, that she should have them in a podcast player. So anyways, that's how we've connected, gosh, a long time ago, or at least how I got you on my radar. And yeah, ever since, it's been a couple of rounds that you've been running it. So we're excited to kind of dive into this. Audio summits, the way you host them is pretty unique as well. You got to love an easy interview process. You got to love an easy, host process, right? Because we know summits are not simple. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about this episode. So Brenna, why don't you give us a little rundown of your business and who you serve and the structure of it so people can kind of, see themselves in you, if you will.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here. My primary function in my business is I run a program called the Pre-Launch Plan Program. So I do this currently twice a year, where these are live cohorts that are a hybrid of instructional curriculum and also coaching, editing calls on the back end. I just started to run a self-study version of this, but almost up to this point, very recently, the self-study has been released. Actually, right before I got on this call, I saw my funnel made another self-study sale. I love that. But primarily, I really love the live cohort of the program. And so I also help people with pre-launch strategy one-on-one. I do VIP days, but all roads in my mind lead to the live cohort of the pre-launch plan program.
Awesome. So
I can't wait to dive into this.
I know, right? It's going to be fun. Let's talk about the early days when you're like, this needs to be audio. So this might even be before you've heard private podcasting, but you were hosting MP3 files on a page that people then click to listen to or something like that, the event. So yeah, give us those early days of like deciding to host a summit like that and then making the switch to kind of private podcasting.
Yeah, it was so interesting because the first 2 times I did Behind the Launch, I did the web page with the MP3. I'm not very techie. Like, I started this business in my 40s, right? Like, no one tells you how much tech and video you're going to have to do.
Right.
So I and it was a simple way. And I was really overall like, how can I create an event that is the most simple it can be? Because I don't feel like any of these events are like simple, right? There's still work. But in my mind, it was like, okay, I can just put this on this web page. We're good to go. And the third round, I had several people be like, okay, I love this event, but it would be so much easier if I could listen to this on a private podcast. And then the MP3, I don't even know what you call it, the page. You could still like double speed and do those kind of things, but it's very cumbersome, meaning if you X out of it, if you get busy, then you don't know, like you can't get back to like where you were at. You'd have to start over. You also have to be in browser. So if you want to be doing multiple things at once, you couldn't do that. So after that, the people spoke and I was like, okay, I need to change this. And so for the third round, I did a private podcast, and it is just such a better listening experience. And I see myself too as a listener of other events. I'm like, oh yeah, this is just so much easier to listen to in a private podcast.
Totally. And I think it's cool because what even gave you the idea that it could be audio? Had you seen it somewhere else? Because this is probably like around 2020, 2021 when you were hosting those first
I bel
ones? Or do you have a year on that?
I feel like it was 20 I believe the first one, which would make sense. Yes, it was, January of 2022 was the first one that I ever ran.
Cool.
So
Okay.
I modeled my summit after my friend and mentor, Marisa Corcoran. She has an audio summit called the Copy Chat.
Oh, cool.
And there's a couple things that Marisa did all audio, and to me, I was like, "There's no
You're
way
like,
in the
perfect.
world I wanna do 15 face-to-face video interviews for this." The other thing I was very clear on going into this is I know for me personally, if I have to get on and do a video by myself, it's like a form of torture. Like, I can have a conversation all day, but I absolutely am not like, I turn down the summits that say, "Okay, can you give us a 15 or 20-minute presentation?" I'm like, "Well, no, because that 15 or 20-minute presentation is like an 8-hour, strenuous job to get this video recorded, especially if you don't have a video person who can like do all of your tech." So that was my audio. Now, the thing that I also wanted to do is even with my audio summits, I'm like, okay, how can we keep this really, really easy for the person who is being interviewed? I call them conversations. How can I have a conversation with someone that is really easy on them and easy for me and at the time, my team of one to put together? And so I had this idea. And at the time, I'm like, okay, this is either, and I actually sat on it for a little bit because I'm like, this is either a really good idea or people are going to think I'm crazy. And my idea was to host the summit, not host it, but record, if you will, the conversations on Voxer. So instead of getting on Zoom, instead of doing any of the other ways you would normally record, I simply go on and I ask people on Voxer. And the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to keep it short form content because it's a lot of information. So I asked people one simple question, which is, what is something that worked well during your last launch? And I didn't even realize it. I was a little ahead of the time because who knew between 2022 and the beginning of 2025, like the launch landscape, the selling landscape online has changed so
Mm.
much. So it really is a timely process. But I wanted to keep it simple. I want to keep it simple for editing. The other thing that's really been helpful this time too, with doing these asynchronous interview style, if you will, is that I have one of my guest experts is, coming from India. Well, we were able to just do this completely asynchronous where it didn't have to be in real time. So there was a lot of advantages of doing it this way. And I know I just gave a long like dissertation. The last thing I will say is by doing it on Voxer too, is that if someone messes up, they just start over or they recall the message.
Yes.
And then I just take these individual audio clips, I forward them to my wonderful assistant, Rebecca, who I couldn't do this business without, and she combines them all, and then we just load them into the podcast player. So it really is, in that respect, the back end of it is really streamlined.
This sounds really similar to how we ended up doing our original success story
Mhm.
private podcast as a lead magnet using Voxer similarly to capture success stories from our users. And a lot of it, I mean, all of the benefits that you just talked about, and being able to reach someone in a different time zone. For us, I think it's like New Zealand and Australia tends to be like the most difficult to schedule with our users that are there, but just being able to connect with people without having to show up. I hear you on the video, the solo videos, and how torturous that can feel. But I love all of the benefits that you're talking about because I feel like this is exactly why we created what we created, both the benefits for you as a creator, but also for your listeners as well. So I think that's amazing. I'm curious, when you first got introduced to private podcasts, I mean, we know Hello Audio is not the only private podcast provider out there. I'm biased because I think we do it better than anyone. But I also know that there are a lot of other options. So I'm curious what your journey was just deciding on someone to, the product to use to host your summit. And I mean, this is obviously a really core flagship product of yours. And so I'm curious what that process looked like.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, something I didn't mention about the way that I do this summit is that it is not a profit event for me, meaning that I donate all of the money that the tickets to be able to get, before it was lifetime access, I'm actually going to switch that up this time, but to a shorter time period. But they're 30, it started out as $27. I experimented a little bit with having it bump up to 57. Now I'm at 37. I just keep it at 37 the whole time because I like life to be simple. So it's $37. When you get a ticket to Behind the Launch, all of the proceeds minus the cost that I pay to the credit card processor go to Learning Ally, which is a nonprofit where they help give resources to children who are struggling to read. My son, who's now 21, fully employed as a firefighter, is just beyond. I almost cry even saying it out loud because, like, when he was a teenager, from fifth grade on or fourth grade on, I learned that he had learning disabilities and differences, and he was dyslexic, dysgraphic. Like, when I got him tested in the fourth grade, he was so behind, but it was like like, until you saw it on paper, we wouldn't have known because he was able to compensate. There were so many things that went on in his journey of getting him through school. One of the major things that changed his life, my life, was getting access to Learning Ally, which is audiobooks. And especially back then, we're talking now, gosh, what, 13, 14, I can't do the math in my head, but it's a long time ago. Like, for them to get access to audiobooks so they could keep up with their class, is I would sit there and have to read to him every night, or I'd try to get him to read to me. And when your kid is sixth grade, seventh grade, they don't want their mom reading to them. So being able to have access to these audiobooks, this is long before AI. So the fact that these audiobooks are also read by humans, where back at the time, the only other option was something called Bookshare, which was very monotone. And so we were able to, and it's how he learned how to read by audio. And it's still how he's able today when he needs to learn something new, how we got him through different college classes, EMT school, all of these things was because he had access to audiobooks. So it's a really important mission for me with Behind the Launch to give back to that. So with saying all of that, when I originally started, I'm like, what was the question? The reason,
No, but that's a good behind. That's I like that because I think that's really important for people to hear too. Because I think I just want to say this. Nora and I talk about this too. We have a couple like low price products. Like sometimes it's cool to make money off the low price products or to pay or to like what's the word? I think most of the time it's how do we cut our like acquisition costs is like typically where we're going with the pricing. But a lot of times it's like nothing in the bigger scheme of where your business is from a revenue perspective. So when you can like think about it from a donation perspective and how that generates excitement for you, motivation, inspiration for other people, that just creates a net positive. And I love when people talk about either low tickets or donating a percentage of, some sort of event or revenue stream or something like that. So I'm glad this came up. Yeah, I wasn't expecting it here, but thank you for going into that. I think that is not a sidetrack at all.
well, and it really helps with speakers. I think speakers really love the fact
Mm,
that they're like, okay, we're doing this, we're doing it for a good cause. It helps me like boldly sell tickets. Like, okay, it's not
totally.
only are you getting all this information and that you get access to this, and this time I'm actually adding on, I'm bringing in some sponsors, I'm bringing on some really cool things that you get with the VIP ticket, but it really allows me to be like, you need this ticket. You need this ticket. Like,
Mhm.
it's $37. It's all this money is going to children in need. So I really like that part of it too as a host. And so the reason why I went into that long story was because I was trying to keep costs down because this is an event that costs me money at this point because of it still costs money to put on this event. So being able to think, okay, how can I just keep the cost down overall? And so I started looking. I gosh, I remember Hello Audio at the time, but I was looking at different options. And I also found an option that's someone else I knew that was recommending, which was something called Bcast. So at that time, when I originally said, okay, I need to do a private podcast, we're going to host it through Bcast. And so that was what originally happened. Unfortunately, and thank God, what ended up happening was the last Behind the Launch, I got I don't even know if I saw the email, actually. I feel like I saw people talking about it where I found out Bcast was going out of business. And so I had bought a lifetime license at the time for to be able to host the podcast. And I was just praying, Lord, please do not, because at the t- I think I'm pretty sure like we had done all the back end work. Everything was loaded on Bcast. Like I had all the
It was
automations
the
were
same
ready.
month that they were sunsetting that you had your big, huge event,
It
right?
was.
If I
Yes,
remember.
yes. So I literally was like, I had the event and it was like 2 or 3 weeks later, they ended it. So I decided at that point in time saying, okay, we can use this for this particular event. We can get the recordings to the people that bought the VIP ticket after the fact, but we have to figure out something different. And then throughout that process, you and I started to talk, and I decided that Hello Audio was the best way to host these in the future.
This is really important because we've all been, as a business owner, especially as a startup, we're all looked at, you have to bootstrap. Not all of us have a bunch of capital that we can throw at our, our businesses. And I know I'm sure I can speak for everybody and probably several of you listening. We've all been on AppSumo. We've probably all seen lifetime deals. We've probably purchased a few. And that is a very normal part of being discerning around the tools that you use and just trying to find and navigate through all the things you have to do as a business owner. And I think, now as a owner of a software company, and we know that there are monthly recurring costs associated with hosting media, as you would imagine, right? Any podcast host or any media hosting company. And so it is hard to see sometimes those lifetime deals knowing that this could happen, right? Not because it's on the competition side, you're like, okay, sure. I don't know how they're paying for this, right? And you think that the new influx of people, it's like they have to continue to influx at the lifetime deal in order to pay for their monthly recurring costs that are happening on the back end. And I know when we received word that Bcast was sunsetting and we had seen the email and we were devastated for all the people on their platform because they didn't give a ton of time. We felt like it was relatively quick, especially when I know people were running businesses and important, events like this. And I think that's just something that we've all probably been burned by lifetime deals in the past, or, it's just we've purchased it and how many of those companies are out of business now. And I'm so grateful that you're with us now. And I'm so grateful that we're able to serve you. And I'm really glad that you were able to host that event without issue because it's such an important thing for all the work that you do, for all the reasons, the donation, the cause behind it, and just helping and serving your audience. I think that I'm grateful that the timing worked out. And I'm also grateful that we can help in the next iteration. Too.
Yeah. And I think I was so naive. Like, it never occurred to me. Like, I didn't even like, it truly didn't occur to me until it happened. So it's definitely made me think of things differently. It's like, okay, if it feels a little too good to be true, then maybe it is. And there's actually something I even bought that was a different lifetime access that I considered using, and I just thought, no, like I don't want to think about this, and I don't want the inconvenience for my audience because, quite honestly,
Mm.
I can tell you how, even though I've tried to tell everyone, okay, here's where you can find the recordings now. I get quite a few emails of people saying, okay, where do I find this again? Because it's not on here anymore. And so, like, as much as I've tried to circumvent that happening, it's still not a great user experience. And that's when it came down to choosing to host this on Hello Audio. That is really where it was like, okay, I want this to be the best user experience. I really work hard to make this an industry event that people want to be part of, that people are proud to be a part of. And all of these things play a role in it, and I think that's what we may not consider when we're trying to think about these different events. Like we get so wrapped up on like doing the thing where I guess in a way it was a blessing for me to take a step back and be like, okay, what do I want this to feel and look like moving forward?
Totally. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think why don't we dive in a little bit? Like, as someone who's listening, who's maybe like, I want to host an audio summit. We've had Wendy Breakstone, which I feel like
Yes.
you might know who she is
Um,
if you're in the audio summit space. We've had a few people on who've hosted audio summits, but I'd love maybe the things that you've learned over the 5 iterations of this that you've been doing audio, whether it was on private podcasting or, when it wasn't even on the webpage, what you learned about yeah, basically running an audio summit, any kind of like tips and insights. If you have some ideas for making the Voxer experience easier or making it easier for your hosts or even the audience, people who are signing up, if you have any kind of things you've learned over the last, since you've done this so many times, I think that's a powerful thing.
I feel like there's always stuff that I'm learning every
Sure.
time, right? It's so even this last time, I for some reason never told people like make sure your notifications aren't turned on, make sure and I during talking to one of these people, their conversations are in Voxer, they're off the cuff. But on the other hand, I want it to be a good listening experience. So it's like, okay, now I need to add that simple line. Like there's these little things. The beautiful part, because it is, we're doing this Voxer part. I was just like, hey, here's your transcript. Could you just say this again for me? Because I need to replace this piece of audio.
Mm.
That is, I think mostly it's been like first with keeping it asynchronous. So I'm flexible. Something I've learned along the time though is that we don't want too much flexibility. Like I have between 15 and
Mm.
20 people that I'm trying to talk to. So if I have a lot of conversations that are just hanging out in the ether that haven't been finished, it's like it weighs on my brain. Sometimes I forget. My assistant's asking me where they're at. So I have gone to scheduling appointments. And so
Oh.
sometimes I'm like, okay, just keep in mind, like, this is if you need to do something else, if you can't finish this right now, we're in different time zones and this is really inconvenient for you because it's early morning for you and nighttime for you, we can do this. But in general, I have found that has worked a little bit better because people are just busy, including myself. And so it's sometimes I'd start conversations, I'd be like, hello, can you get back to me real quick? So keeping that with asynchronous. The other thing that I've had to be really specific about and in the conversations is we're answering one question, but helping
Mm.
give direction when I'm speaking to people ahead of time. So I have like a little like rundown of things that I tell people. I like to keep the conversations to 10 to 15 minutes. I also would love if you can speak to a specific strategy and also if you can back it up by numbers. This time for behind the launch in the past, I haven't done this, but we're giving a little bit more context to the conversation. Like, how big is your audience? Is this the first time you've ever offered this particular product? So that when you do listen to the conversations, because when we go in, there's not a lot of fluff. This is okay. This is how this is what worked, what didn't work. People are introducing themselves. So there's keeping in mind that I'm trying to give as much context. So really thinking through, if you're thinking about doing something similar, I would say too, and this I did well ahead of time, but I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I think even before you go into creating an event like this, now I'm a launch strategist, so this is my brain things, but it's thinking, where is the final destination that we're pushing people to? For me, it's the
Mm.
pre-launch plan program, right? Like I need people who are launching, who want to increase their launch revenue, who want to decrease launch stress, who want to get better fit clients into their programs. So I had to really think way back to the beginning of what is this event and the premise of the event that pushes people to the right place that I want to. And so I'm very thankful that I did that as well. The other thing I think that I did accidentally well, even though I was scared, was doing something a little different. That I think sometimes we get so caught up in seeing what is so and so doing? I know I'm like that, right? Like I want to get all of my research, all of my data, make sure I'm making a good decision. But sometimes it's going outside the bounds of those decisions that really help create something interesting and fun that people want to listen to. And that's the really cool part about Behind the Launch is I have people who are like, I can't wait till the next season. I can't wait till this comes out. I love this event. This is the only event that I listen to all the way through. So when you can really think about, first of all, the offer, and we can talk about how I use this in my own launch plan. If you can really think about that offer and then really think about the hook and the angle that's going to bring the right people in from the inception, then you start creating an event that does so many things for you. And I think with doing this event, I get to meet wonderful new people that I haven't been connected to before. Yeah, I get access to an audience that I wouldn't get to talk to in the past, which is beautiful. I also am able to sell into my event. So really thinking about like what is the purpose of this upfront and spending time will make a huge difference in the long game.
So good. You know what just hit me too? Are you looking at this being like, why wasn't this a public podcast? And possibly, because I think I know the answer to this, but it would be my guess. But it's kind of interesting because I could easily see a public podcast. There probably is one. I don't know what it's called or anything, but this idea of like what's happening behind launches, right? So talk us through that, because I think we can then go into from that angle, talking about how it like feeds your program and how you use this very strategically in what you said. I think you said it earlier on, pre-launch. So we can get into kind of your brain a little bit. We also on this show like to kind of showcase the expertise of our people that use our products, and you do pre-launch strategy. And so this idea of using this as a launch, I'd love you to walk us through that. So yeah, thoughts on, that. Have you ever had someone ask you that? That's another way we could talk about it too.
I haven't. I have thought about doing a public podcast. It's funny, it's something I've been thinking about a lot. I actually met recently with like someone who this is how they help people launch podcasts. And I'm like, okay, what's the angle? What do I want to do? And she's just like, well, I like behind the launch. I love this idea for it. I was like, yeah. And so it's kind of made me think, I'm not sure. So the reason why, there's a couple of reasons I haven't done a public podcast for this event. I'll be honest. The first one is the way my business is set up right now, in some respects, right? I get to take breaks, meaning I
Mhm.
I feel like if I do a public podcast, and someone would argue, no, I could do seasons, but I don't know. Like, I feel like if you want people to listen to you, it's probably good to have this like weekly where you're become part of their routine. I'm a copywriter, so I can always argue with myself about why that may or may not be true. So I think the fact that I don't have to be on all the time, there's something about, and if I'm going to do a podcast weekly, then I got to promote it weekly. Where with behind the launch, and it goes to what I talk a lot about too, which is I believe that, and like I said, I have a self study, I have an evergreen product, but there is something about bringing attention, focused attention to a promotion event, a campaign, whatever that is, that really gets all the eyes and the excitement and the buzz and the things. So with behind the launch, I have that, right? I also think there's something, and I've been talking a little bit about this lately. I talk about anticipation marketing. There's something about having restraint in our business. When people get access
Mm.
to things all the time, sometimes it becomes dull, right? It becomes repetitive. So there's something about behind the launch where you only get this twice a year access that makes it something that people look forward to. There's a buzz about it. So the other reason why I haven't done a public podcast is that I use this as a list builder and a lead generation. So right now to get access and to be part of the event, the speakers agree to sending emails to their list promoting the event. So I use it as a lead gen. So yes, with a public podcast, I may have a little bit more consistent lead gen, which is why I've been thinking about doing a public podcast, because I do have these wonderful like spikes. And then I have these other times where my lead gen isn't going, it's not on the same par. But primarily it's because of the lead generation. And the way that I have set up these behind the launches and the way I've set up my business is I like to have that break over the holidays. And then I also love during the summer that I have some time, especially with my daughter going. Nora and I were talking about our kids being in college. My daughter just graduated high school early. Like, I'm like my time with my children is so extremely small. And if I would have really thought about it, it was really, really small over the last like 5 or 6 years. So it's in my face now. There's only so much time. So I really like being able to have a little bit more of a lazier summer, although I never feel like I'm completely lazy because it's just who I am. But in my mind, I'm like, I don't have to do certain things at certain times. But I use behind the launch as what I call like a pre-launch. Like people say, oh, is this your pre-launch? No, some people sell off the back end of a summit. I don't. And I don't think there is a right or wrong, but for me, first of all, I speak a lot about pre-launch and how important it is, about how there's people that are going to come into your audience that are ready to buy right away, which they can in the way that I've set up my pre-launch. But there's a much larger percent of your audience, probably 93 to 97% of your audience is not ready to buy at the time that they're seeing an offer, right? So I like to put people into a point. I also don't love like coming off a back end launch, the back end of like behind the launch to me is a complete give or value give, right? I like the thought of like, hey, you're part of my world now. Here, let me tell you a little bit more about who I am, how I work, my values, how I see the world, how I see launching, how I can see this for you. And if you like this, then I'm going to invite you to come alongside me and take the pre-launch plan program. So it really works out really well in that structure as well. Is I have a lead gen. I'm able to warm people up. I'm able to get people to, to get to know me a little bit better so they can make a really good decision about to purchase with me, which is one of my biggest values is giving people a lot of autonomy. And there's been in online business, I came on the scene. I started my business in 2018, which was like the high pressure mecca. You got to invest now. And I always say with launching too, I don't understand that we've created this system where I'll get off my soapbox after this, but we've created this system with launching where we ask people to spend thousands of dollars with us in a 7-day period. And then we're upset when people don't buy from us, like we failed or something. Like, when does this work in any other part? I spent like a month trying to think if I wanted my new Dyson portable vacuum that I just bought for Black Friday. Like, how are we expecting people to
Right.
make decisions for their business that are thousands of dollars so quickly?
They're expecting you not to think about it too.
Well, and maybe that's it.
That's what
Maybe
they
that's part of it. So we kind of the whole ecosystem of what I do really works together in that regard.
Ooh, so much there. So this is really good because what I'm hearing, I hear a couple things because yeah, you could totally have a podcast on launch strategies. And I think what's interesting about podcasting is you could do that. It would probably be really great. We have a case study podcast. Feels like accidentally. We actually had a lead magnet that was success stories that essentially it became the like launch your private podcast as we're on now. But what I like to point out is public podcasting is always an option, but the problem is I hate it even that we have it on a public not I don't hate it. There's reasons why we chose this. But I hate that there's like 500 people that listen to this or 1,000 people that download stuff in a month and I have no idea who they are. Not at all. Like we can do link tracking, like we can use dynamic ads which our product has and we can have show notes dynamically, but like we can't know like who's actually listening. We only hear about it when they come and tell us like, "Oh, I like heard about Hello Audio and then my friend told me and then I like listened to every episode," right? Like that's what we want. But what I like about how you are doing it and how potentially keeping it like this and making your public podcast like maybe something like bigger, I don't know, or like more niche, there's like angles you could take on it. But by having an event, that's something you control. Like you have the levers, you have the email addresses, you have that connection. And it's not that we're not connected with our listeners. I would hope to think. I think they end up connected to us by using our product, right? Or like talking about our product. But like we have no idea who's listening. We're gonna like work on it. But again, it's like ninja stuff. It's not generally speaking, we can't ever know what a download is attributed to. But when you use something like a private podcast, you have all that information. You know how engaged a person is, how many episodes they've listened to, and you have their email addresses. And they expect you to like be like, cool, I signed up, right? They raise their hand. That is different, right?
I don't remember from my last launch because I did a case study, but I think I'm going off of my memory here, but the launch before my last one, I'm pretty sure it was like 60% or over 60% of the people who bought the pre-launch plan program from me had listened to the most recent behind the launch. So
Oh,
not
nice.
only did I get to be, and I didn't realize with Hello Audio, we'll have to talk about like I can see what episodes they've downloaded, how many. So, but that like even knowing, okay, is this event even working for me? Or and I think that would be the harder
Yeah.
part about having a podcast is like, okay, is this really moving the needle in my
Mhm.
business where I can look and have, no, this is a direct correlation
Yeah.
because it is work, it is time, it is money. I think, is this worth it? And when I go back and look at it, I'm like, oh, absolutely. And I know for a fact people found me in this recent cohort that I'm in right now, my program, that people found me from the last behind the launch. So it definitely has that advantage as well.
Yeah. There's something important as every business owner makes decisions about because there's any that you can sign up for anything, you can use any marketing strategy, like they all work. And someone's going to be telling you on the internet that public podcast is the way to grow your list or whatever. And, it's a way, but you have to be like thinking about what that entails. And that entails promotion, it entails having guests, it entails supposedly SEO and podcasts, which, like, I don't know. There's like some things, but I like to say why at Hello Audio we did this. We looked at the landscape of public podcasting And we're like, no one is talking about this. Nobody. And so like, yes, we have a success stories lead magnet and it was our most popular lead magnet for a while, but we're like, you know what? We could probably do another lead magnet. Let's get like more strategic here. And so we wanted to be shareable because the thought leadership for us was our move. And of course, we made that decision. It was not the first thing we launched. Like you would expect the company that talks all about private podcasting to probably have a bunch of private podcasts, right? And so we made sure we did that for 3 years before we were like, I think it's time to have a public show. And now we're shareable in a different way, but it's not that we don't look at it as lead gen. We look at it as super accessible content for people that will lead them to our other things. And,
Yeah.
some of the stuff we have coming down the pipeline at Hello Audio is using our product even more. That's the hard thing is like our product that we built it for marketers. It can get pretty ninja. And so, we want to demonstrate that to people. And so we also like to say we also host public podcasts. Like Hello Audio does do that. And so we wanted to, also host as well. So I like getting in the head of business owners about why they make decisions that they make. And like you're like be discerning, having those kind of restrictions or constraints, right? Holding back on doing certain things because you can't do it all, right? So Nora and I have helped a lot of marketers, coaches. We've launched our own products. Nora has coached a lot more people than I have for sure in their different programming. So when it comes to how you want to structure your products and your launch events in particular, like this summit is a launch event. When we think about it, when you launch over and over again, there's all these things you really want to do. And you're like, this would be great. And then you have to let things go with, what do they say? Kill your darlings or whatever, where you have all these cool ideas. And then like push comes to shove, deadlines happen. And you're like, oh, guess we're not doing that. Put it on the agenda for next time. Right. So I'm sure there's some cool like advances or things that you might want to tweak. And then maybe we can help you use Hello Audio to like get some better data or create better interaction and engagement with your listeners, create more touch points potentially. Yeah, there's definitely some things we can probably help you think through. So what are your dreams or visions for this next version?
Well, so I don't look at this as a launch event in a way that I would teach launch events, meaning I don't look at
Totally.
it. So I look at it like a pre-launch event. So for the last, I think it's the first, second. So the last 3 times I have launched the pre-launch plan program, the live cohort, I have launched it without a webinar, it's been primarily an email only launch. I want to have the opportunity to bring affiliates in the future so I need in my mind some type of more formal launch event. But in the past, I felt like my webinars haven't converted as well. Now, could have been because I'm not great on webinars. Could it be that the actual the thing that I was talking about wasn't lining up properly? I feel like webinars to me feel a little stressful just because there is webinar is an event inside of like another event of a launch. So I think I would love to see if you've had anyone that's used Hello Audio in terms of that type of being able to have other audiences come in also as affiliates. And for a launch event that doesn't feel like, I feel like a webinar does the thing that I don't love, which is getting in front and talking to a camera. And that's the thing that I would like to figure out if I can find something that is, and I think it's kind of boring. Like, I'm not saying webinars don't work. I just feel like for me, it's like, okay, I'm going to put all of this time and effort into something. Can I do something that's a little different but that will still bring an audience in? And then, yeah, so that's kind of my question.
I don't know what you are immediately thinking of, Lindsay. I was thinking pop-up podcasts.
Mhm.
So I think we've had folks in lieu of webinars because webinars are stressful for a lot of reasons. I don't love them. I think the marketers have ruined a lot of just the connotation of webinar. And I think as a consumer, I don't get excited about going to a webinar, right? And even if we call it a workshop, we can definitely call it other names, but it kind of has the same feel sometimes. And as a mom, we're all busy. It's hard to make it at a specific time. It's hard to sit at a computer for a specific, even if it's only 45 minutes, which it rarely is, it's still very difficult to dedicate your attention. And so we've had a lot of people use private podcasts for their webinar content. And it doesn't it gives them the freedom to do it a little bit differently. It allows people to share that asset, that audio asset. Now I used the term pop-up podcast earlier. All I mean by that is that it's just like launch content. Private podcast is available for a certain amount of time and then it expires. Then you can automatically archive it. So it kind of has some built-in urgency without the fake, like there's only 100 seats available. That's not true. And that's just a big turnoff. But when you have an asset, a valuable asset that's available, can you create an affiliate link to that opt-in page? Absolutely. Is a private podcast that creates a lot of value similar to your summit very shareable for affiliates? Yes. Is an affiliate, do you feel a lot better sending them to an asset that they can listen to anywhere at any time versus a 90-minute webinar? Probably. So I think there's definitely something there, especially if you had a lot of success with an audio-based summit that people would pick up on in terms of using some of your would-be webinar content or pre-framed content said a different way, in a pop-up podcast, in a private podcast that would get people excited and pre-framed and ready for the invitation to join your program. And I think that's an easy ask for affiliates. It's easy to create assets around it. That my immediate reaction to what I would do and we were, maybe a webinar alternative.
I love it. Actually gives me an idea too. I don't know if it's a good idea. I haven't thought it through yet, but as it's something I've thought about before, which is we during behind the launch, we talked about what worked well during a launch. During behind the launch, I have these conversations in my Facebook group, but I feel like maybe even doing what hasn't worked well, kind of like the launch
Oh.
fails, because at the back of it, it could be like, okay, if you don't want to be in I hate the word use the word fail, but we'll use it here just to make things simple. You don't want to, have a launch failure, then let me tell you about the pre-launch plan program and how we sort, kind of can get around some of that. So I kind of like that
I love
idea.
it.
Yeah.
I think as entrepreneurs, I don't have any negative connotation around the word failure just because I think, cool, that just means I did something and I have data that tells me what to do next. The way I see it, and maybe it's just coming from corporate, that is the necessary path to get to success. I have to go through some of that learning in order for me to get where I want to be. And so, yeah, whatever it ends up being called, I love positioning it as a way for people to learn without necessarily having to experience some of the pain,
Right.
because we all know that
Mm.
sometimes some are more painful than others. And I think the learning can be more painful than others, maybe, but in a way that also positions your program as a way for them to avoid some of the missteps based on your experience and your, expertise and proven track record and all of that. And I think having a trusted advisor, especially in this space, is very meaningful. And I think by that asset to me is just a demonstration of your expertise. Those assets seem to work really well in launches because, and you said it, like how you expect someone to give you thousands of dollars after sitting with you for a week or for a 5-day challenge. But I think there's something very special about audio and using that as an asset, a demonstration asset. So people do actually get to know you and hear you and everything comes through in audio, your values, your quirks, your coaching style, like all of it helps you develop a stronger relationship and a stronger connection with that person versus like a PDF or that webinar where they're already going to be on guard. It's a different atmosphere. And I think that I love that idea. I think it'll do really well.
Yeah, I think it could even tie in students too, right? Because a lot of times people do join
Yes,
me
case
in the
studies.
program where they're like,
100%.
okay, I joined
Yeah.
because I wasn't doing this or this happened. I knew that we missed out on this
Oh, yeah.
revenue. So I feel like it could tie in really nicely as well.
Yeah, I think you have a good, especially when they're already coming in and enjoying your audio content, you're basically giving those folks the ability to like continue with the way that they like you, how you present it already. We like to say that on a public podcast, having a private podcast as a lead magnet is so great because you've got listeners, you're already in their podcast player, and then you end up taking up their feed because I assume you're going to put your program in there, right? So if you have your program as a private podcast to help with accessibility, now Brenna's taken over their podcast player. And when they go to their podcast player, they're learning from Brenna. And we love that for folks. And if they're in every behind the launch and now they're like subscribed to all the feeds, right? And you just become someone that they're obsessed with. And I think that there's something pretty powerful about that from a branding perspective too. So I also want to point out by having them have a journey through multiple private podcasts potentially in your business, that's where their listener score goes up. So we have a super listener score tied to every email address that engages with whatever podcast you have on Hello Audio. And it will basically say like, oh, Nora's listened to 3 behind the launches. She consumes all of them. She's one of the first to download. She goes all the way through. She went through your last private podcast, pop-up private podcast. She didn't buy, but like now you can go back and look and see essentially like I should reach out to her. So there's these like listener scores that kind of create a way that you can be like, I think Natalie Bullen did this episode. We're re-releasing it, which is past now because this is going to go live in January. Natalie Bullen has an episode where she talks about reaching out. Was it to people over 60 or was it 80? I can't remember what her line
80.
was. I think it was 80. So you can look at the scores, filter them, and then you have a list of names. And you can DM them. You can send them an email. There's like lots of things you can do. I think, yeah, there's different strategies with that, but it's just nice to know that kind of information as well from someone who cares about their audience, like the touch points, and is truly trying to help them and knows that their program can help. That information is pretty powerful in a launch, container.
Oh, I love that. And my active campaign has something similar. So the fact that I can carry it along.
We modeled it after when we created it. Yeah, lead scoring. Yep.
I love it. Yeah. So I really think that is just an extra added benefit that I didn't even think about.
Yeah, because it looks at their download history and basically says this person's like literally downloaded everything. They like you.
Yeah. Which makes you so much more confident too when you do reach out to someone. I know my first like launch, I was just like, anyone who clicked on a sales page, I'm like, this is horrible. I never want to do this again. So I've been able to be a lot more, and time-wise, it takes up so much time, a lot more strategic about making those. And I never want to put, like, the worst thing to me is when someone is like, you can feel it when someone's wanting you to buy something and you're like, oh, like, I'm not ready. Yeah. And I don't want that feeling on anyone. So for me to be able to go in and be like, hey, and feel much more confident that this person's actually engaging is wonderful. So I love that.
Cool. Well, this has been really fun. I knew this was going to be a good conversation, especially with what you teach and your expertise. Definitely something that, gosh, everyone's thinking about. I think launching, and that has been under the microscope, I think, this year. And I think we're going to see some cool stuff next year just because people have been like kind of sitting back and being like, what's happening? What's working? Like who's doing okay? Is everyone okay? And so definitely you guys check out Brenna's Behind the Launch. It should be live when we're running this. That means if this like really inspired you, go run over there and check it out because she always has amazing guests with really good content. That's the other thing I was going to say about public podcasts. If you have to fill an episode a week, right? It's not that the case studies get worse. It's just like there's a lot of stuff. You're doing a curated event. You've selected these people based on networks, what you see out in the world, what's working, reaching out to those kind of folks. That curation is important. And I want to say, as someone who has listened to, I think I've done 2 of yours, the content is really good. It is absolutely worth it. And so if you're listening to this around the time in mid-January, that means you can jump in. I don't know if you're going to have any of this evergreen or you unarchive them at any point, which might be an interesting strategy for you as well, because there's some good content in there. Yeah. So thanks for sharing all of the behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Behind the launch.
I appreciate it so much.
Cool. Nora, do you want to do our takeaway question?
Sure. Final question we ask all of our guests is that if there was a private podcast with your life's musings, what would it be called?
My life's musing. My first thought was, where can I find a white t-shirt that is not see-through? Because I'm a little vain and I'm always looking for the perfect white t-shirt that I wear like as a uniform every day. So that would be it. I'm on the constant search.
That's a good one.
I literally have been going through that same thing. I feel like every Black Friday, I'm like, maybe I should just try this brand. Yeah. So
Well, especially if you're like your mid-40s too.
yeah.
Like you can't have
Right, you're like,
anything
"Someone
see-through
wants
all the
to
time.
see."
And it has to be thick, right? It has to be a substantial
Yeah,
shirt.
but
to
not too
cover.
thick because it's starting to get a little warm
Yeah.
in here,
Yeah.
right? That's also what we're dealing with. So yeah, oh my gosh, I love you so much. Yes. Oh,
Nora's the first subscriber.
oh my gosh. I'm there. I'm already subscribed. Yeah. That's funny.
Cool. Well, yeah, so that was really fun. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And there you have it, audio heads. Another episode of Launch Your Private Podcast is in the books. I hope you're leaving today feeling even more ready to amplify your voice and connect with your audience in meaningful ways. The adventure continues in our next episode with even more insights, strategies, and inspiration to help you along your own private podcasting journey. Of course, make sure to check out helloaudio.fm to start your own private podcast. And remember, you've got amazing content that needs to be heard, so let's turn the volume up. Until next time.